Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yep.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Hey, I see more attendees joining us. Alrighty, so welcome everybody, and this is EJ Xiong, Precision Livestock Management Specialist at UNL, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to join us on this beef technology virtual trade show focused on virtual fencing today. First off, I want to bring my sincere thanks to all of our sponsors, the Vence, Gallagher, Nofence, and Halter for sponsoring this event. And I'm pleasantly surprised that we have every manufacturer for virtual fencing available in the United States joining us here. You will be hearing from the company representative later. So first off, I wanted to spend the first 2 minutes on general agenda and housekeeping items. So as attendees, please note that we have 4 companies to pitch their products, and each of them will have about 13 minutes, including their producer speaker. And then please note we have 5 minutes Q&A session, follow each company's pitch. So you have plenty time to ask your question. Please use the Q&A function, which is at the end of your Zoom panel. And we will monitor it and make sure we answer your question. So if Aaron Berger and Thomas can wave your hand, and I have Aaron Berger and Thomas Aquino help me co-host this event and help me moderate this event. So then at the last 30 minutes, we will welcome everybody for a producer panel discussion where you can have a lot more opportunity to ask your questions, and they will share their experience with you as well. Without further ado, I'm going to turn my stage to Aaron Berger to introduce the first company.
Well, we're really pleased that you've joined us tonight. And our first company up tonight will be Vence, and they're going to talk about their product. So, Ty, I'll let you go ahead and open it up and talk about what your product does and how it works.
Awesome. I'm going to share my screen here and I'll go through a quick presentation. Is everyone able to see this?
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so to start it out, when we talk about Vence, we're going to talk about 3 main components. You have the cattle rider, which is the collar that goes on the animal. Then you have the base station, that is the infrastructure that connects your herd manager software back to the collar. So when we talk about Vence and how it works, as you can see here in this picture on the left-hand side of the screen, there's 2 colors with the fence line. The fence line is set up as a one-way passive recapture, and the animals are contained via pressure zones. So that first 15-meter line there, that white zone, is going to be the sound zone, followed by the 75-meter sound plus shock zone. The one-way passive recapture allows those animals to, say an animal gets outside that pressure zone, it is able to move back inside the Vence fence line with no modifications needed to our system. With these cattle, when they are collared, we do have a 5-day training process. This training process includes a 100-acre typically pasture with traditional fencing. How that works is we set up a containment zone around that fence line, so the animal gets a sound when it goes up against the traditional fence line. The next 2 days, we move that in, and the animal gets the shock stimuli when it goes up next to that fence line. And then the 5th day, we set a cross fence across the pasture, and you're able to see if those animals are respecting that fence line. And then after that, you're free to turn your cattle out and use fence system. So we're going to talk about the collar here. The collar has a radio chip and a GPS receiver inside of it. The radio chip allows that collar to communicate back and forth with the herd manager software. The GPS receiver allows you to see those cattle and track them 24/7. The 2 external components are obviously the sound stimuli as well as the shock stimuli. And then battery life is another thing I'd like to talk about here. Battery life is all based off GPS, just like your cell phone. So the closer those animals are to the fence line, the more that GPS is going to get work. So if a cow is 100 yards away from your fence line, that GPS is going to ping every 30 minutes. If the cow's within 10 yards, it's going to peen every second. This is the base station. It's set up about 4 foot by 4 foot, stands about 20 foot tall with the mast. Our base stations run off LoRaWAN technology and cellular backhaul to bridge the gap to the herd manager software. They're built to be fully autonomous. So they have the solar panel and 4 car batteries on the inside. Typically, we don't see any ranchers needing to go touch this once it's out in the field. The only time we have seen any issues with this if it gets struck by lightning. These base stations are grounded, so you just go in and flip the breaker on and off. We have base stations in Florida through the hurricanes that have lasted through the whole thing and have no issues with them. This is an RF plan. It's a 35,000 acre allotment in the mountains of Colorado. This gives you an idea of how much coverage our base stations have. When you're looking at this map, the good green coverage is what we like to see when we run our RF plans. That allows you to download and send new signals within an hour, typically. Sometimes when you see the blue signal here, that is about 2 hours roughly on download time. This is the herd manager software. This is where you're going to track, visualize everything that you need on the ranch. You're able to put different water boundaries in. You're able to look at physical fence lines. You're able to put gates. So when you go in and see, you can see exactly where your cattle are at. You do get a training process with our herd manager software as well with our rancher success rep. So we typically do that a few weeks before you're going to call your cows. So you do come in, they help you build fence lines. They help you with anything you need to know about the software. So when you do turn your cattle out, you're not on your own on that side. You are able to build and schedule virtual fences in advance. So you're able to have 16 different polygons on at once. So if you want to rotationally graze your cows, if you want to keep them off different burn allotments, riparian areas, you're able to have multiple fence lines on at once. When we collar these animals, we do like to associate the ear tags with the collar ID. So when you go into this herd manager software, you are able to see exactly what cow you're looking at. Track your animals 24/7, as well as getting some grazing data back with heat maps and individual tracking, which I'll show on the next slide. So this is just going to be an example of how Vence has been used in Nebraska. It's a 100-acre paddock with water being the wheel hub in the bottom right-hand corner. Like I did say earlier in the video, these cows are rotated with no one out in the pasture. So our one-way passive recapture allows these animals to move across the field as we put Vence fence lines out. We do have one escapee down here in the bottom that you're seeing here. The one-way passive recapture allows that cow to go back in and get inside the virtual fence line. This is our heat map data, grazing data. So you are allowed to go back and run scripts from even say last year when you're looking at your grazing data and see, hey, I want to change how I'm moving my cows, what I did last year. So you can even make plans off of the grazing data you get back from our system. Value drivers with Vence. One big one that I'm going to start out with is stocking density. So better manage your land and the ability to put more cows on an acre. Another one that we've seen quite often is the ability to add acres. So acres that are either don't have any fencing on them or have poor traditional fencing and require more manpower than you have. You're able to add Vence to those acres and add those into your ranching. You're able to manage your cattle inventory and lost livestock. Another big value driver is labor efficiency. So completely replacing, say, if you rotationally graze with the electric fence, you're able to implement Vence in there with limited manpower, intensive rotational grazing systems. Hard to fence areas have been a big one for us as well, up in the Rocky Mountains, like I showed you in that last slide. And then even removing traditional fencing for wildlife and conservation. Vence history here. We were founded in 2016. Our headquarters in San Diego. This gives you an idea of where we are at in the United States right now. We were acquired by Merck in 2022. We right now have roughly 60,000 collars on about 260 ranches. These are pivotal universities that provide data and different use cases to advance our technology. I wanted to quickly show this slide. So Vence 2024 beyond, improvement on our software as well as hardware. One big one is battery life. We are looking to launch a new collar here in about a year. Battery life is a big one. On that, implementing health metrics, so heat detection and calving alerts, as well as integrating more technology inside the Vence hub. quickly, I'll run through price. Um, Base stations are $10,000. It's like a piece of ranching equipment. You buy it, you own it. Or we do sell them for $12,500 and send someone out to help you install those. Our cattle riders are set up as a $40 annual subscription model. So if a collar breaks, comes off, there's breakaway points on those collars. So if a cow gets hung up on a tree, a fence post, etc., you're able to send those non-working collars back annually and get a new collar every year. Also, updating technology as we go. We wanted to be on an annual subscription model. So when we do come out with new collars, you're able to send all the collars that you have back and get the new ones with that annual subscription. So that is all I have for you guys, and I'll turn it over here to Caleb to share a little bit of his experience as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Ty. I'm going to share mine real quick. Yeah, see it? My name's Caleb Berkowitz. We're located in Eastern Washington. We started Vence about two and a half years ago. We took Vence the first year. We put it on 350 head. And we ran these cows in northern Idaho. So we're about 3 hours drive time away from them. We run cows, in northern Washington, some over Montana, some over in Idaho. But the thing about our ground in Idaho and our lease is it's all open range. So there's no hard fences. There's nothing to do with it. We run on a lot of Idaho Department of Lands. We run on a lot of potlatch, Forest Service ground. And so the biggest thing and well, the problems we were running into was having a guy spend so much time over there, keeping track of the cows, making sure they were in the correct permits. Our permit is solely divided by drainages, by mountain ridges, mountain tops. They're supposed to stay within that. But before Vence, I think cows got up and over those, and we didn't know. So with Vence, the tracking for starters has been huge for us. We're 3 hours away. We know if they are or not where they shouldn't be. It's easier for us to be one step ahead of those cows that are venturing off. We don't have to wait for that phone call from the sheriff because they've ventured over and they're on the highway. We don't have to get the calls from the Forest Service because they're in the wrong riparian areas or they're in the new seedings of the trees. We have all that mapped out now, and so we know exactly when and where they are. And just from a working standpoint for the business and workers, Washington is a tough state, and employment, they're trying to move ag to 45 hours. And so when we can keep our guy home in Washington and not have to send him all the way over there all the time, that's huge for us. Our second year doing it, or let me back up. Before Vence, we used to have two guys go over there together. It's about 25,000 acres, open range. We usually start about, the 15th of September. And those two guys would get 350 pair gathered up by the 15th of November, just because of open range and it takes so long and there's so many miles and they would go out and ride and they would never come back with something, you just didn't know where they were. This year we took three of us. We went up there for a total of 12 days, and we were 100% gathered out of there, just due to the fact that we knew exactly where they were with the tracking system of Vence, and Vence with its sound and shock stimulation, it kept them inside that permit. Therefore, we only had to gather inside our permit. We didn't have to go and search for them when they got outside the lines, during the summer that we didn't know. So the task before, we estimated at about 610 man hours, from the 15th of September to the 15th of November. And we did it in 120. I mean, we reduced gathering 350 head by 490 hours. I mean, roughly. But it was a huge deal for our business to save that manpower, to save the time and effort to drive all the way up there, gather them all, you send them all home, then you have the same crew transfer down, we preg them all, and back out we go. We're not split up as much as we were. I know an Indian tribe and stuff like that loves it. We have a creek fenced off, I guess we call it, that the cattle don't go into, because they're trying to, the fish and whatever habitats that are lay in that draw bottom, we keep it out of there. And then potlatch for, foresters and logging and stuff. They love it that the cows are staying away from the new seeding trees. They get a couple years old, and then we turn the cows are allowed to graze through those trees. But to stay out of those areas has been huge for them and for us. And I know as far as getting our permit in upcoming years, Idaho Department of Lands and potlatch Vence is something they haven't, but have thought about making, mandatory because they love the improvement on their land, as we've tried to do our part to help them as well. If somebody goes in there without vents, you don't manage it as well. I think, Idaho Department of Lands and Pollax, and they're kind of seeing that side of things too, that if we work hard and then somebody else comes in behind us and doesn't have it, I don't think it gets taken quite as care of. But just the amount of manpower that it's saved our company, the diesel, drive, before we had a guy spend 6 days a week up there, and now we're 3 hours away. And if all the cows are in the permit, and Vence has a no movement function on it, and if everything's moving around, we don't go up there, just because we solely know the fact that we don't have to. Everything's in. It's taken a lot of stress off of the phone calls, the worrying about where they are they in the highway or are they in a different permit? And people call you and tell them to get out of your yard and stuff like that. Yes, it's open range up there, but you still have neighbors and stuff that, disagree with that policy. But we're able to vent them out of those private properties as well, and keep them out. And so, the last huge thing for us is come gathering, right? We also are able to shank those fences down. We can set events ahead. Those cows slowly work their way to the corral. We don't have 30,000 acres to gather, right? We're down to 10 or 15, and you know where they are. Every time you go out to gather, you theoretically should come back with something because you know where it's sitting. Those cowboy days are fun. I mean, people enjoy riding around and stuff like that. But from a business standpoint, to have a guy riding around and get 5 cows a day, he spent 8 hours and didn't get nothing. That's hard to pay a guy, especially when Washington's cracking down on hours such as that. So just things like that. And also another important is when you lose a $1,800 calf, and you lose a $2,500 cow, it doesn't take long to offset your expenses just to get into Vence, let alone not have to worry about the fuel, the manpower, the phone calls, the emergency 911 calls. All of that stuff has been put to a minimum ever since we've gotten Vence.
All right, we got just a couple minutes here to ask some questions from panelists. I'll start this off, Caleb. Has your gather rate changed? You mentioned you gather a lot more quickly, but has your total gather rate improved since you've used Vence?
Are you talking total head count?
Yep, total head count, cattle
Yes.
turnout, cattle coming back.
Yes. So this was the first year we were 100% accounted for. We lost one cow and we lost one calf. We found the calf at gather, but we found the cow because of events. We had, we shrunk everything to the corral, and we had a couple left out there, and we could see where they were. Right, we ride up there while there's a collar laying on the ground, and there's she's maybe been gone for a couple weeks, right? But I don't think you'd ever found her if we'd have never known that. Therefore, we also obviously keep a track of the head count in our computer system. So when a one or two does die during the summer, and we're up there riding around in circles looking for one or two more, because that's the right thing to do, right? You want to keep looking in case of the hopes that they still are out there. How much time have we wasted searching for ones that weren't actually there?
Talk just a little about your training to get those cows ready for that experience. What did that look like at home, and then once they go out on the permit?
Yeah, for sure. So we took them in, and like Ty said, I think ours was like a little over 100 acres. It's got a hard fence around it. McCallie helped me. We put them in for the first time. We set a sound system. I think it was for a day or two we did on ours. And then after a day or two, we put a little bit of a shock zone on the outside of it. So when they bumped up to the hard fence, they were trained to come back in. A couple days later, we widened that shock zone so it was wider than the sound zone. And then I think it was only 2 weeks, and we took off and sent them to the mountains. And we had now the hardest part for it was taking some 8 or 9 year old cows, right? You take them to the same pasture they've been for the last 9 or 10 years, and you're telling them, I need you to stop out here in the middle of nowhere, right? That was maybe our hardest learning curve for the whole thing. Now, this second year, we've taken some younger cows. They've gone, this is their first time up there. They didn't know where they should or where they shouldn't be, right? So when those Vence collars started beeping, they automatically assumed, we're headed in the right direction. We need to bounce back into the permit, stuff like that. But our second year was phenomenal. I don't think we had two problems towards the end of September. And then once we started gathering stuff and moving them around, and we had a couple, but I want to say we had under 5 or 6 problems throughout the whole entire year. We go there from June 1, and we try to be out of there by middle of the end of October.
And I'll just jump in real quick. I'm McCallie. I'm one of the Rancher Success Reps. I work with Caleb. And we, like he said, we trained those cattle in about 4 days in total. But then when you look at the grazing data and see how well they did and everything, you'll look at that data over the course of a couple weeks. And that's how that training protocol works. We expose them to the shock zone, and then, like Caleb said, to the sound zone. And then we're actually testing them on a true virtual fence, not on a hard fence, and seeing how they react to it. And then this coming year, Caleb, like he said, he had some new cows go on there, new heifers that were there and were exposed to Vence completely, and hadn't been on the place before. And you could see how that also helps with retention when they go out into places they don't know. So, yeah.
All right. And it's just keeping time, panelists. I know we got a couple questions from you. Save those. We'll have some time at the end, but we're going to go ahead and transition to our next company. And Thomas, I'll let you go ahead and introduce eShepherd and launch them off.
Yeah, so we'll let Charles go ahead and take it away. He's talking about the eShepherd and their virtual fence system.
Thank you, Thomas, and thanks very much for the opportunity to be here this evening. So my name is Charles, and obviously I have an unusual way of talking. So I'm a New Zealander. Moved over here in July and living in Kansas City, which is where the Gallagher head office is. I guess I've always been involved in agriculture, and in particular commercializing technology into agriculture, from genetics through to RFID and other bits and pieces. So that's a bit about me. Brandon, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself before I go into depth and onto eShepherd?
Hi, I'm Brandon Arpan, owner-manager of the Box Tech. I apologize if my connection is slightly bad. I'm actually, even though I ranch in Southeast Montana, I'm actually in Florida for military stuff.
Cool. Thanks, Brandon. Okay, so eShepherd is a neckband or a collar, and I'm holding one up here in front of the screen. So it's a device that hangs under the chin. We've got these chin guards here and chains that extend up alongside the animal's neck, and then finally a top strap which sits over the back of the animal's neck. The top strap has a breakaway designed into it, so that if the animal does get the neckband caught on something like a tree, it can pull and easily remove itself from that situation. The chains are very easily adjustable. They slip up and down, and there's also a buckle system similar to a backpack. So you can easily fit the neckband to the animal, and if you had to take it off, you can easily do that as well. So the device has two large solar panels, one on either side of the neckband, and those solar panels are continually charging an internal battery. And so as long as the solar panels can see the sun, it's going to receive charge, and that battery will last for 7 to 10 years. So there's no need to replace batteries. We can make that claim around battery life because it's very similar to the battery componentry that Gallagher uses in other solar devices. Gallagher's been around for 86 years, so it's got a lot of experience in that space. The device itself is also very robust. And fundamentally all of the plastics and other componentry have been designed around the battery life, so it's intended to be a very long life product. Having said that, the product also comes with a 3-year warranty. In terms of communications, we can certainly install base stations on a property if it was sort of rangy or extensive, but we can also avoid base stations and go directly to a cellular network. So the device is intelligent enough to connect to a range of different cellular services, and therefore no need for base stations. The width of the virtual line on the ground is only really about 6 feet wide. So that means that we can get down to very small areas, so easily grazing on less than 1 acre. And we can also graze, obviously, on very large areas, as large as you would like to draw on the web app. eShepherd software comes in the form of a web app on your home PC or laptop or even iPad, and also a mobile app. eShepherd is a full purchase model, so it's not rent or lease. Ranchers own their devices and their hardware. In terms of that pricing, seeing that one of the key questions being asked in the short survey was around price, the neckbands themselves are $250 each, assuming that more or 60 or more are being purchased, and there is no limitation on the number of neckbands that you can purchase. So we'd prefer 4 at least, because they come in boxes of 4, but you can also buy 400 or 4,000, so no limitation there. And base stations are $6,000 for the first base station and $5,000 after that. And then there's also a data charge, so that the neckband can effectively talk to a computer via the internet. And that is either $2 or $2.50 per neckband per month for the months that the neckbands are actually being used. So rather than all of those numbers, Arizona State University did an analysis of various virtual fencing products, and eShepherd over 5 years was about $80 a cow, and over 10 years it was about $50 a cow. So those two numbers are probably easy to use in terms of crunching some numbers. So that's enough from me. I'm going to throw a few questions to Brandon, and he's going to talk about his experiences in terms of using eShepherd. Brandon, how about you describe the ranch?
Yep. So again, I'm in southeast Montana, like the extreme southeast corner, shortgrass prairie. We run about 100, or not about, we have 100 neck bands. We have two base stations ranging over just over 5,000 acres. However, with partners of World Wildlife Fund and another organization called Property Environment Research Center, we are going to be expanding about 700 neck bands and another 5 base stations, encompassing another over 10,000 acres here in the next few months. We're running a cow calf operation. We've raised up our own replacements. So this year we had it on the cow mothers, we had it on the yearlings, we attempted some bulls too. Saw great results with basically everything except for the bulls, but that's partly on us. And we're talking like, only a few ever lost a neck band. Mostly it was due to our own ill fitment. And we saw some excellent containment rates. We're talking about only 1% ever got out, and we never had to go deal with them. They brought themselves back in. That's kind of the ranch in a nutshell.
Cool, that's great. And Brandon, I mean, in terms of the property, the topography and the contours, it's pretty rangy. Would that be right?
Very much so, yes. So our operation, while it is shortgrass prairie, we do have some quite rough areas, not necessarily like huge elevation gains and losses, which does actually present a little bit of an issue for us because of base tower placement, ensuring that it's got good sight over maximum amount of the property. But there are other areas where you can't even hardly ride on horseback to cover those areas. You would have to walk up and down them at best. So there's also some concerns around key species like the greater sage grouse. We're in a key area for them, and that's something that with grazing management, with the virtual fencing, we're able to kind of modify how we're grazing to not be around their nesting sites or not being around their leks during breeding season. We can potentially further do this for antelope migrations. There's a lot of opportunities in terms of wildlife cohabitation. And then this has qualified us for a lot of different, either government programs or different private agencies to be able to work with over the landscape and diversity that we're seeing, to be able to get more funding for water infrastructure. And the possibilities that this is taking us down is pretty extreme.
Cool. And I think, as I mentioned, eShepherd comes in that form where you can use a base station, but it also comes in the form where you don't need a base station. You can go straight to a cellular network. But in your case, the base station was certainly required. Is that right? I mean, how many base stations have you got? And I guess, do you see the need for more base stations when you increase neckband numbers?
So we bought 2 right away, thinking that we'd have one at our north place, one at our south place, because our ranch is disjointed. But after, I'd say, most of the summer, actually, that's when we finally decided to set up a second one, because we personally really want to push the system as much as it's even possible. So we only put up the first one out at the north place, thinking, let's see what kind of coverage we'll get with that. Let's see how far away we can be, what kind of downlink times we'll end up with. Saw pretty darn good results. But as we grazed through the pasture that we had them in at that particular time, we were getting farther and farther away, and we were actually starting to get into a shadow, which was fine for when they came back to water. But because we are doing very tight moves, we are opening up new areas every 12 hours, and we're talking like 5-acre virtual paddocks for the new areas that get opened up. So when they very first start grazing an area, they're in a pretty tight area, and then that area gets just bigger and bigger through scheduled moves. So I don't have to actually do anything. It just will automatically turn on the next section for them on this 12-hour rotation that we were doing. So I'm seeing like super great results for that, and how they responded to all that for the base stations themselves. Quite easy to set up. I just actually took the second one down from the north place, brought it down to the south place, set it up in about 2 hours is all. It actually only took me that long because I forgot half the materials back at the house and had to go back and get them. But very easy to set up, very straightforward. They've got a great guide to kind of walk you through the process. And I do have like some pictures and whatnot if anybody ever wants to contact me afterward of what the base stations look like when they're set up and some of the other things. But it looks somewhat similar to Vence's picture there. A big solar panel running a single battery, though. Been completely fine throughout the entire spring, summer, fall. And then same thing with the neckbands themselves. Great battery life. We're about to take them through the winter here, but with the projection that they're going to last at least 7 years, potentially up to 10 years, it'll be nice not having to take those on and off all the time.
Cool. And I think we might have just room for one more question. I was going to ask you about the software. I mean, is it easy to use?
Very easy to use. So, in fact, I almost want to say the cows learn faster than we did, but that's not exactly true. Like for the basic functionality, we learned that in just really like an hour or two, and it really helps with the eShepherd team. It's great interaction with them. They really set you up for success. They do several onboarding sessions, or at least one very robust one. They teach you how to use the software. They run you through how to do the training program for both yourself and for the animals. And like I said, for the basic functionality of containing them, turning one pasture on and one pasture off, it took like all of an hour. And then for the majority of the livestock, about 80% were trained in 48 hours. Another 10% or so took another day or so. And then that last 10%, they took a few days, but everything was trained within 5 days. And we had it on all the way up to 12-year-old biddies who have always gone to that corner of the pasture, always want to go to that corner of the pasture. And now I'm telling them they can't go to that pasture. And they did just fine. Absolutely no issues.
Great. Thanks very much, Brandon. Thanks, Thomas. We are open to some questions if there are any.
Yeah, I think we've got time for a few. You participants, feel free to type in the chat or in the Q&A feature. It looks like we've got one, and I think I'm going to interpret this question, but it's how fast do you move the fence when you move animals? So I think what it means is like when you go on the app or your phone and change the fence, how long does it take for that to where the animals have access to the new pasture?
So it's really really fast. And like I said, there's a feature called schedule moves. So basically, it takes me 20 minutes at the very beginning of a week to set up the entire week's or more, depending on the area that I'm got them in. Sometimes I've had them in 10-day strips where for 10 days it is just automatically opening up new areas, and that is completely removed from me. I have nothing to do with it. I can monitor it, or if there's something ever wrong, I can modify it, but I don't have to do anything with it. It's just every 12 hours it opens up a new chunk, and it depending on where the animal is, where the base stations are, kind of then depend on how long it can take to update their neckband to that there is a new portion of the virtual paddock that's turned on. Typically, it's everything is within 30 minutes. If you got them really in like 2.5 miles, if you got them further out towards 3.5, maybe 4, it might take upwards of just 1 to 3 hours. But we almost never saw anything beyond that, and we only saw that when we were getting really pushing that range of the base station, and there was some topography in the way. But hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think you actually knocked out the next question too, was what is the distance that one of those towers can cover?
Oh, yep. So at least in our area, it's that the sweet spot is definitely that 2.5 to 3 mile mark. And obviously, if they're close to that, great. Once we start pushing beyond that, we start seeing a little bit of a lag time. Not much. Definitely acceptable for our book. If you have more of elevation changes that could potentially help you in getting some really, like if you had a single mountain in your property, you stick one up there, it's probably going to see for a fair while. And the eShepherd team have assessment tools to help figure out how many base stations do you really need to meet your goals, whether that's just containment or if you're trying to do something like I'm doing, which is high intensity rotational grazing. They help you figure all that out.
Great. I think in the interest of keeping up, we'll go ahead and move on. Aaron, if you want to introduce our next speakers, and we'll circle back to the panel discussion at the end.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the Nofence company. And Megan, we'll let you go ahead and talk about your product.
Great. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. Well, thanks for inviting us to be part of this. And I am happy to share about Nofence. So Nofence makes a small ruminant collar for sheep and goats. That's the smaller collar on the left, and also a cattle collar. Those collars have solar panels on them that are continually charging a rechargeable battery inserted inside the collar. And the collars communicate to an app on your phone. So we have a mobile app, and you make all of your pastures and do all of your pasture moves from the app on your phone. Nofence varies a little bit. There's some differences between Nofence and the other companies because we do not make a base station or a tower. And so all the communication is through cellular networks, which means you do need cell service on your farm or ranch to use Nofence optimally. Okay, so similar to how Vence explained their system, you set the virtual boundaries from the app on your phone, and when the livestock approach that boundary, the collar emits a scale of tones. The tones increase in pitch. It sounds like beep, 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 beep. And if they keep going, that's when the livestock receive an electrical pulse through the chains around the neck. And let's hope that you can hear this. Great. And so if the cows kept going, they would have received an electrical pulse when they hit the imaginary line.
And if an animal does escape, and based on ruminant herd mentality, presumably they'll want to return to the herd, then the virtual fence acts as a one-way gate, and the animals are allowed to walk back in with no consequences, no beeps, no electrical pulses, and they're then automatically reactivated within the pasture, and you receive a real-time notification to the app on your phone that they've returned and are reactivated. Okay, so just to recap there, so when you activate your app, you define all of your pastures. You pre-program all of the virtual pastures that you want to build. You are using a aerial view of your farm or ranch through Google Maps. You then fit the collars on all adult animals in the herd. And then they go through a 3 to 5 day training process, which is something we walk you through in detail during the onboarding when you become a new customer. And then from then on, you are monitoring and moving your livestock through the app on your phone. So just a few up close screenshots of simplified views within the app. So on the left, you can see two different animals here. You're able to edit the names of all of the collars to the name of your animals or to their ID tag. And then you can see how many audio cues, how many electrical pulses, and how many escapes they've had for the last 24 hours, the last 48 hours, and over the last week. In the middle here, that's basically our home screen. So it's the status page that you'll see every time you open the app. And that's a heat map of where the animals have spent in the last 24 hours. Again, you can look over the last 48 hours or over the last week. You can also look at where individuals or the herd has had the most electrical pulses or escapes over that same time frame. And this app, the screen share here on the right is an individual animal's activity level. So you can see, and there's an accelerometer, it's kind of like a Fitbit in the collar, which is tracking animal movements and how quickly and slowly they're moving throughout the day. And so you are able to look at an individual's activity levels. Many of our customers use this as a proxy for an animal in heat or an animal that may be getting sick or lame. So Nofence is a Norwegian company. We were founded in Norway in 2011 by a goat farmer in Norway who became a mechanical engineer and created the first goat collar. We then have since graduated to creating a cattle collar. And we have currently about 150,000 customers, animals with collars on, representing about 7,000 customers. All of those collars have logged over 500 million hours of grazing time. And as you can see on this map here, that the country to the top on the north, that is Norway. So many, everyone, Nofence is a household name in Norway. Everyone has it or knows someone that has Nofence. We are also commercially available in the UK and in Spain and have pilots in other areas of Europe. And regarding the United States, we have had a pilot program going on since November 2022 for the last 2 years. Those 45 pilots have gone through 2 grazing seasons now. You'll hear from Tyson Coles after me. He was one of our pilots. And then we started to commercialize this last summer and have brought on since about 125 more customers. So in total, we have about 175 customers in the United States. And this is a map showing that distribution. So in terms of pricing, the sheep and goat collar is $199. The cattle collar is $259. And the app costs anywhere between $3 to $4.50 per collar per month. And the subscription is monthly, so you can turn it off for the months that you are not using it, for example, in the winter. if you bring your animals in and don't need to virtually contain them. And so you're only paying for what you use throughout the year. We do provide discounts on our subscription at 50 collars and above. The collars have a lifespan of 5 years and they come with a 5-year warranty. So we'll replace collars if anything happens to them. And so for interested producers, I encourage you to visit nofence.no and click on the United States on a drop-down menu, and you'll see an area to fill out a survey, a quick quote, and register your interest. And when you do that, you'll be able to see pricing, and then it will trigger the system for me to get in touch with you, and we'll have a phone call. And so our US headquarters is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the senior sales manager for the United States. I work with Elise Sorensen, who is our office manager. I just want to list our phone number here in case you'd like to call. And with that, I would like to welcome you to the Grazing Revolution and hand it over to a producer in Idaho who has been using Nofence for 2 years, Tyson Coles. Tyson, take it away.
All right. Yeah, like Megan said, I've been using the Nofence collars for 2 years now. I was one of the pilot customers that started here in the United States. Got our collars in November of 2022. And with that was trying to figure out how I was going to be able to use these collars through the winter. And Megan's got my slides, if she'll just throw those up for me. And I'll go through a little bit of the winter side of it on the bottom 2 slides. I've got 3 slides total. The first slide, a little bit about our operation, is a small family farm, eastern Idaho, around the Idaho Falls area. And I have currently about 70 large animals with collars. And we graze strictly on our own privately owned ground and rented farm ground. I have a cow-calf operation, and so I usually split up the animals in a couple of different herds, some to go to our dry land range pasture up in the hills a little bit on the South Fork of the Snake River, which does have some different elevations and hills and mountains. But I do have a good cell service throughout my entire farm, so the Nofence system works really well for me. These pictures here is just here in the valley close to home. The top left picture and the whole top is some shots I took from a video that I recorded. A lot of times I'll graze stubble fields in the fall, alfalfa fields, and I have really the last 3 to 4 years tried to graze every acre, as I have been incorporating more regenerative farming practices and keeping the manure out in the field rather than bringing it into a corral where I have to haul it back out from. So there's an irrigation canal kind of in that picture in the top left, and then it curves to the west that follows along with those other pictures. And in between the trees, the irrigation canal's there. And so I have to cross the irrigation canal with the cow-calf herd when I transition them out of that stubble field that you can see into the alfalfa field in the background. And typically, before we had Nofence, we would use a electric wire fence around each field and keep them fenced off of the irrigation canals. I do have some other neighbors whose property is right there as well, so we try to keep them fenced out of the neighbor's area. And so in moving the herd, usually we would drop the electric fence wire to the ground, call the mother cows across the canal, and then we would have to then try and push the calves through the water in the canal to try and get them back with the mothers so we could raise the electric fence off the ground and keep the whole herd contained again. This year with the Nofence collars, I did it all myself pretty easily. Usually it would take about 6 of us try to corral around the calves and push them into the water. Sometimes the calves would bolt and go the other direction. Sometimes they'd kick us as we're trying to push them in the water. And it just usually would take us 30, 45 minutes with the physical fence scenario. with the virtual fence, I wasn't concerned about any of the large animals crossing into the neighbor's ground. And I actually just left the irrigation canal opened up so they could come back for a water source. So I didn't have to haul water to them or pump water to them into a trough. And so I just opened up the virtual boundary, called the cows across the canal, which they started going. It's a little harder to see in the pictures just because I was trying to add as many as I could, but they were zoomed in a little closer top center. There are some black animals there in the green alfalfa field. And then the pictures kind of in the middle on the right hand side show some of the other cows working their way to the irrigation canal. And then on the bottom left, there are some calves about half mile away up on another plot of ground. The calves were not contained. They don't wear collars, just the cows, but had not worried about them going anywhere. I do have a physical electric fence for a perimeter for them, but slice everything up a lot tighter with the virtual boundaries to keep the cows contained to the specific area that I want. And within 10 minutes of adjusting that virtual boundary, calling the cows over, I just left and sat on a bridge over that irrigation canal and watched as all the calves saw that their mothers were leaving, wanting to get back to their mothers. They ran down. They went through the canal themselves, and pretty much the whole herd was moved within 10 minutes, all by themselves with no interaction from me, versus previously was strictly electric wire. We'd be pushing them, trying to get them all contained in about 45 minutes. So cut down on the manpower needed, plus the hours taken to move those animals. And then we've used that for grazing cover crops in the fall and mid-summertime. You can see the bottom left cover crop mix that we move the animals into to be able to graze. And again, there we start with larger fields that you can kind of see in the middle left. That's kind of how the farm is broke up, with the irrigation canals going through the middle. And then I set up different smaller virtual boundaries within that larger area. And this year, the main herd here on this farm, we grazed about 40 cow-calf pairs on about 2 acres per day. And I, like some of the other guys with the other companies, about every 12 hours, I would just go in and adjust my boundary and move that cattle herd. Megan, go ahead and switch to the next slide. So in getting the collars going, is it worth it to lay out the money for virtual fencing? And that farm that the cows were just on the previous slide, it's 135 acres. Fencing had pretty well been completely worn down over the years. The previous owner had some cows, but then sold them, and the fences just kind of wore out and fell over and got buried in the snow. So in looking at refencing that whole operation, this was as of January of 2024. I put this together for another presentation. It would cost me about $20,000 to do physical fence, 4-strand barbed wire around that whole perimeter for containment, and then I'd still have the internal fencing that I need. And then throughout the course of the winter, I'd have to pull them off and still feed those cows throughout the year in the wintertime. So about 135 acres physically fenced right there. This is using 100 cows for round numbers. And then a comparison, virtual fencing, collars would add up to, in this scenario, about double the cost of what physical fencing is. But as I mentioned, I have a dry land farm up in the hills where the other rangeland pasture is, that some additional cropland acres that I plant and have crops in could also be grazed. There is water on some of it. And so if I was able to graze those additional acres, not only would I be grazing this 135, but I would be grazing an additional 435 cropland acres that I've never grazed before because there is no fence. And so the total cost there initially is higher, but when you look at the cost per acre, it actually becomes quite a bit lower. And then throughout the course of the winter, by grazing those extra acres, if that saved me just 1 month worth of feeding baled hay, the offset there is within $5,000. So it would still be a little more throughout the course of the summer and winter just in feed costs. But as you can see in the top right-hand corner, this summer, I did set up some different virtual fences within a middle tier of that farm up there, working closer to the river bottom. And I ended up grazing another 100 acres just this year alone up there to gain acres and saved some time and hay that I will have to feed this year. So let's go to the next slide, Megan. So then, having gotten the collars in November, I was able to graze some cover crops one time after the cows were trained. And then I had already started bale grazing the cows out in the fields. I would just carry out one day's allotment of hay and feed to the cows. I do 3x3 bales. I just carry them out on the forks and then spread them out for the cows. In doing that, trying to figure out how to test these collars throughout the year as part of a pilot program, I looked at laying out my feed a week at a time rather than just every day. So, a lot of times here in Southeast Idaho, we will get down into negative temperatures. This last season, when I was actually bale grazing them, we got down to like negative 30 2 or 3 days in a row. And I had the hay set out, so I didn't even have to start the tractor. I didn't have to have it plugged in. And so looking at just the wear and tear on the equipment, the hours on the tractor, the hours for me to go out and feed after I'd let the tractor warm up. If I went out every day, I was at least an hour on the tractor from warm up time, plus spending time out in the field, taking out the hay to them, fuel, and by doing it virtually, I would haul it out one day a week. Sometimes I'd have the kids come out and help me cut the strings off the hay bales and pull those out so I could separate them out and spread them out. And then that allowed me to cut my usage from about 7 hours on the tractor to just 3 hours. And so throughout the course of the week there, that cut my total expenses pretty much in half. And throughout the course of a month, that really saved me over the course of a 6-month period, $6,000. So the net savings from grazing in the summer and bale grazing through the winter by saving hours on the tractor and time and labor and fuel, the net effect is it actually was $1,100 cheaper for me to put the collars on the cows and use it year round than it would be to physically fence the one farm and just graze them there. So that's pretty much the gist of what I've got. I guess we can open it up for questions at that point.
All right. Great examples there, Tyson. I think to stay on schedule, we're going to go ahead and go to our next presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for folks to ask questions. So Thomas, I'll transition to you.
Yep, I think our last company is going to be Halter. So I'll let Jack tell us about that, and then we can go ahead and we'll transition into our panel. So think about your questions.
Perfect. Give me 1 second. I'll be ready to go. Well, good evening, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well and appreciate you taking the time to walk through everything with myself and one of our ranchers, Dan. I used to start off, I want to give an introduction on myself. I grew up ranching in north central Nebraska, which grew my dislike for tamping and digging post holes. It ultimately led me to virtual fencing, in which I've been in the industry for about 5 years now.
Jack, are you sharing your screen? We cannot see your screen.
Oh, there we go. That should work now.
There we go. Perfect.
There we go. So back to the introduction. So I grew up ranching north central Nebraska, figured out I did not like digging and tamping posts. Ultimately led me to getting into virtual fencing and realizing that there's a lot more to this whole idea than just saving time on fencing. There's a lot of other potential benefits when it comes to the actual profitability of an operation, and ultimately going back to my mission, and I think the company's mission as well, where we want to make sure ranchers continue ranching, and ultimately that comes back to profitability. And I want to give Dan a second to give his introduction on himself.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Mushrush. Currently, third generation on the ranch. We're a multi-generational, multi-family ranch here in the Flint Hills of Kansas. Primarily registered Red Angus, where we have a spring herd, a fall herd, and we'll get into it in a little bit, but kind of a combination of range grazing, where things are a little bit different. And then we're kind of, everybody thought we were crazy a couple years ago. Now commodity prices looking a little wiser. We're doing some crop ground conversion back to cool season perennials, where we can kind of work more of a, what I call maybe a New Zealand or a Argentine model, maybe a little more managed, intensive, improved pastures. So kind of a two-part with the spring and fall herd, and then kind of a two-part ranch systems based on where we are during that time of year. So that's it in a nutshell.
Love it. I love it. And getting into Halter's introduction as well. Halter's background was started in New Zealand in 2016 and has grown from one dairy farmer's son into now over 200 employees across multiple countries and fast approaching 300,000 collars across the globe. And in the United States, right now, we're across 7 states and continuing to grow after deploying earlier this year. And getting back into, I guess, that mission part of what we hope to achieve at Halter and what we believe our system can help producers achieve is really becoming more productive, more profitable, and more sustainable. The funny thing about all these words is it means different things to different people. Everyone's got their own definition. And what we hope to is help producers achieve is their definition of each one of these things. The productivity on their operation could be personal, could be grasslands, the profitability, and of course, the sustainability of an operation. I think all of us here kind of look at what we do on a day-to-day basis and believe that we are stewards of the land. We only have it for a certain amount of time, and all we can do is take care of that property and the land before we pass it on to that next generation and make sure that we leave it better than we found it before. Now, getting into the fun stuff, what we actually all want to see. Here's the collar that Halter has produced. So the big pieces here that we're looking at is that we have solar charging on the system. Now that allows us to have very high precision when we're talking about these grazing systems, especially where we started off in New Zealand, where we're grazing on high density, high frequency moves, moving quite a few times a day on cover crops and just on the pasture land they have. This battery life was necessary in order to make that happen. We need to have high precision on the GPS points so we can continually contain these cows and make sure that we're giving the producers the best product possible. Right now, we're looking at about 6 years on the estimated life of each one of these collars. After that 6 years is done, we'll go ahead and replace that collar for you as a part of the warranty. So there's no issues with, I guess, needing to buy a new collar or anything like that. We'll just go ahead and replace it for you once anything comes up that makes that device need to be replaced. And like I said, that live locations is going to be one of the key things for our system, making sure that you know where that cow is at any given time, right? That doesn't matter whether you're in Kansas or Nebraska or Montana. Being able to know where those cows are at, whether they're on the road or whether they're stuck in some hole, making sure that you understand what's going on at all times is highly important. The piece is no cell reception required. Our system operates on kind of 3 main components. So we have the collar itself. We have our base stations that the collar sends data to, and that base station sends the data out to our app, which you can use on your phone, tablet, computer, and be able to see where those cows are at, draw your paddocks, and be able to move those cows from one pasture to the next. So ideally, we can go anywhere, do anything with that system, and not really have any concerns about being able to get the data in and get the data out. And of course, those solar panels are on both sides. So we have more unlimited battery life and a light there. That light really just helps you producers when you're applying the collars onto them. Make sure you have successfully paired that collar with the cow and make sure everything is going correctly during that application process. The other piece is very ergonomic, durable, and good looking. Now, one big thing I think that's important to notice is in New Zealand, where the company started, that welfare piece is extremely important to the community and the government over there. So making sure that we go through thorough ergonomic tests with the system is something that's pretty much integral to what we do. We cannot move forward without it, especially in New Zealand, let alone other countries. And so that's one of the key points I think the engineering team focused on while moving forward and designing these products over the years. Now, with our system, there are 3 different cues for containment and movement of these cows. The different cues are sound, shock, and vibration. They're fairly simple in the high level, but on an actual animal level, they go into very granular data and information. So the sound cue is going to be basically your warning zone on those animals. When they approach that boundary, they're going to go ahead and get that sound, very similar to kind of a car. If you're backing up into a wall, you'll hear it ramp up, and that cow understands and trusts the system to know exactly when she's actually going to get the electrical stimulation versus that sound stimulation, which is one thing that's very interesting talking through with the engineering team on cow psychology and understanding exactly what that cow's thinking at any given time. And of course, obviously we want happy, healthy cattle out there in the pasture, which is one of our driving objectives for the company. And I guess looking at kind of an operation, we want to make sure that everyone starts off with kind of a blank canvas, right? Look at your current perimeter fences, look at your internal fences, and don't imagine maybe a lane, maybe imagine a pinwheel. There are no limitations to how you can break up your pastures using this system. And this is a great example. Rougher terrain, a wide variety of different trees and everything like that. But this producer's chosen to draw different paddocks across that different area and really just focus on, I guess, not having those limitations on yourself and not limiting what you can potentially do with the system. And it could be a pinwheel formation. It could be lanes back to water. It could be daily moves. It could be moves 3 times a day. It's really up to you as a producer on what you want to do with the system. And I always say this is very similar to a calculator. You're only as good as the person that uses it. And it's really up to you to figure out what the best way to use the system is. And this is a wonderful photo. I will let Daniel talk through because he took it yesterday, I believe, right, Daniel?
Yeah. I did a little bit of work for this thing. No, this is a set of fall cows that we just got done AI and so I finally got to play around with the drone a little bit to get some pictures of this, but it shows, I think, a couple things in one photo of why we like it. One, this is a really highly intensive managed set of cows. There's 100 pairs there. I'm giving them it depends on moisture conditions, but when I can, I'm trying to keep them on about an acre at a time. And then kind of creep them forward a couple acres and then kind of break that into a new shift. One, I think that shows really good just how precise that is. You know, that line in the forage is really pretty cool. The thing I think is neater than that, though, is my manure deposition. We're getting patties all over the place there, so that's exciting. That's what that is, though.
Yeah, and I think Daniel's right. One of the big things that I guess we focused on always was making sure that we had that precision, and that's what the solar panels and the solar charging really allows us to do, is get more locations, have more precision, and be able to do this intensive grazing system that Daniel's done, but also go into more extensive landscapes as well. And Daniel, I guess kind of give everyone a little overview of the operation and how you've been using the system a little bit more.
Yeah. So, and I should say, so we're only about 45 days into it. So we're still a little green. Our why, I guess, for anybody listening, why would you do this? Haven't quite heard it yet. We need the money. We're in debt. I think that's maybe one that's overlooked a little bit in our industry. We have bills to pay, and especially as a multi-family operation with no outside, we haven't married into a lawyer or anything like that yet. So in our part of the world, a 5% increase in harvest efficiency equals a 20% increase in stocking rate. That one stat basically is how we justify spending money on collars. I feel like 5% is actually probably a pretty low hanging bar when I get into explain how we do some things, especially in the native. And so can we get 10% more? Can we bump our stocking rate 40% even? I think we can actually. And so we're going to throw more cattle at this, at these huge overheads, these fixed asset costs that we have, and try to pay ourselves a little bit more and try to pay the bank. Right now, like I kind of mentioned it, we're kind of a two ranch system almost. These converted crop grounds like you're seeing here, we're incredibly tight moves. Precision's important. At least one move a day, if not more, really tight when the moisture conditions allow it. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing now. I'm going to try to go over this pretty quickly, so I apologize if I go over in respecting everybody's time. The native, I think, is where we really have an opportunity to increase our, this is pretty easy to show increased stocking rate, I guess, and pretty easy to measure harvest efficiency because it's you can go out and measure grass. It's a mix that we have pretty much pegged down. Like I said, this is very much that Southern Hemisphere model of grazing, I guess, if you will, of kind of knowing what you have, which is quite a bit easier than range land grazing that I've always kind of been used to and grew up with, and still 90% of our acres are. That other 90% is what is virgin Flint Hills prairie, so tall grass prairie. We do a bad job of cross fencing and rotations for a couple of reasons. One is we can't use step-in posts because of the name of our location, the Flint Hills. We have enough rock. We can't literally put step-in posts in the ground anywhere that we would like. The other thing that we do that's a little blows people's mind is we burn our pastures every spring. And so there's a constant fire almost annually passing through there. So polywire, if you did manage to get some a little more permanent posts in the ground, it's not going to do any good either. We deal with the reason we burn is we get a lot of woody species coming in. They're invasive. How do a lot of those come in? Seed spread, fences, bird perching is how a lot of our brush problems intrude into native pasture. So anytime we can stop putting barbed wire fences in with a carbide rock bit, one T-post at a time, that's really positive. And like I said, I think our harvest efficiencies, our bar is so low, we're going to see a big bump, a big boost in there. The other thing we're doing that's kind of innovative, one of my larger neighbors is the Nature Conservancy. And so we are in a partnered project with them where we're letting them and Kansas State University do some bird and stream studies on our side of the fence, as well as their property. And in return, with collared calves as opposed to kind of wild Mexican yearlings, which is kind of the Flint Hills model, we're able to do some controlled animal movements on their side. And so I'm renting their side, obviously good for the rancher. They're expanding their bird and stream bank studies, which is obviously good for the conservation side of things. And so there's a win-win there as well. But like I said, in respect to everybody's time, I'll keep it short. And then if anybody has any questions, when we open it up, we'll go from there.
I do have one quick question for you, Jack. Could you maybe just take a quick minute and describe the training procedure, the training recommendations?
Yeah, I'll let Daniel talk about his training experience and kind of the onboarding process, I guess, with the team.
Yeah, so pretty good. Actually worked really well. And we, as a being kind of a pilot, we actually had some Halter people on site, so I didn't have to do much. Collaring was pretty easy. In regards to how we train them in such a tight area, because we kind of jumped right into really intense moves. Our protocol was 4 days long. The first day we set up poly wires and put the vents right on those. The second day we bumped our vents about 20 feet off of the poly wire. So we moved the poly wire 40 feet, bumped the vents 20, for example. And then the third day we pushed the visual cue of that hot wire out, I think 50 or 60 feet. Fourth day we were probably 100 feet away from the vents. And on day 5 we took the poly wire away. One thing Jack didn't mention, I think, is a really strong point of the Halter collar is there's positive cues as well as negative. So when you there's a directional base buzzing basically that happens when those animals are facing the direction that you want them to go, and it buzzes. And so within those buzzings, there's some two-way movement, and that really helped the training. One, it helps the training process. Cattle just seem to get that, and two, it also, I think, makes the rest of it a lot easier down the road when you can kind of positively reward them as well as negative. It's pretty intuitive, actually.
Yeah,
and you were wrong, Jack, on the lights. The lights aren't just for installation. You can turn those lights on the collar at any time. When we were seedering cows, we had a couple old cows, actually, we weren't going to breed. And so we turned all the cows coming through red. So when they came through, make sure, she didn't get lost in the paperwork. We don't give her a cedar. We don't give her a shot of Ludolice because she's going to town. And I've actually used them a couple other times. We had a couple pairing issues here before breeding. And so you tell kids, the green lights, go find the cows with the green lights. Tell me which cow's stuck in them. So it's actually, from a management standpoint, it's actually been I use the lights all the time, actually.
And I believe we have a Christmas set coming up.
That's what I hear.
But yeah, that training process, that'll be basically individualized for each operation, understanding what your goals are. If you're running a more intensive system versus a more extensive system, those training processes are going to be different. And that's one of the things our team works through with you on an individual basis and make sure that you are set up for success. Because if the training process doesn't go well, everything else doesn't go well and it falls apart. So we want to make sure that that initial starting process goes well for all of our operators.
Well, thanks for that. I think now we're going to transition into our producer panel. So participants on Zoom, feel free, type your questions into the Q&A. I've got a few to kick us off, but I think I might start. I know we've got all our producers, and then for an academic perspective, there's a lot of research going on with these virtual fence collars too. Dr. Travis Mullinex from Oregon State is joining us. So he may, you can throw some questions at him, or feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to add.
EG, were you going to have a quick survey for folks to look at while we're in our panel discussion?
Thanks for reminding me. I do. Thanks, Aaron. Okay. So gonna ask you guys for a big favor. This is really important for us, not only to help us evaluate how valuable this event has been to you guys, but more importantly, question 2 is how we can prepare topics that are more relevant to you and that you want to hear in the future. So if you can spend about 30 seconds, we would really appreciate that. I wanted to make it clear that producer panelist speakers, please feel free to answer that question too. You should have the ability to.
All right. Well, while you're answering those questions, we can go ahead and get started with our panel discussion. One of the questions that came in, and this goes back to the first presentation, I believe, on Vence, as far as heat detection and calving detection, and maybe each producer or the company rep can talk about that a bit, but what are some things that you've observed with that, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that is nothing that we have right now. That was just talking about Vence 2024 and beyond. That'll be based off movement and technology that'll come in the next color that we'll release.
Okay, great.
Charlotte.
I haven't paid for mine yet. Jack's going to charge me for it, and my honest Halter's advice to me, and I think this is probably wise, was walk before I ran. So let's bring it in blocks. The accelerometers are on. I think you're paying for data processing. So that was what they told me. I'm more excited about the calving events they can tell me about than heat events. I kind of breed on time because I'm constrained for time, but I calve in 1,000-acre, 1,200-acre pastures, and I spend a couple hours a day on a four-wheeler just trying to find the stupid things to tag and weigh them as a registered breeder. And if we just knew where they were to begin with, that'd be great.
Charles here from East Shepherd. So those behavioural features will be coming through for East Shepherd probably towards the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. They require a bit of data, and having collected a fair bit of data, it's important that those are analysed and delivered right. So we'll take our time in delivering those.
And that's one of the things on the Halter system as well, is just making sure that the transition, I guess, into the U.S. market with a wide variety of breeds, wide variety of systems and situations that we're dealing with, whether it's calving or heat, really does take quite a bit of data and time to just make sure that everything is going well and everything's going right within the environment.
And from the Nofence perspective, we're also working on developing those notifications in our app. Right now, we do have the individual animal monitoring, which is what producers are using as a proxy for heat detection. And we have heard from many customers that when they know it's calving season and they see an animal isolate itself or even escape, they can almost bet that that animal has calved and they should go check. And sure enough, most of the time it is. So yeah, just through the information we collect now, you can use it as a proxy for those things.
Just to touch on what Jack said with Halter is that, any of this data needs to be validated within certain systems you work in. And so you're only good as predicting as the data you put in it. And that has been the challenge of using dairy production setting data from our traditional dairy herds, pen settings, and trying to use them to estimate or predict a behavioral response on the beef side, and it doesn't work. And so a lot of these companies have been very slow about coming out, and Halter has validated theirs and even validated on the beef side. And I've begged since May to have the access to do that, and sooner or later they'll give it. But there's a lot of opportunity there. There's just companies are a little slow to release, because of not wanting to predict bad responses.
I think there's another question on here that's come up, and I guess all of the companies can respond. What are there any issues, or talk about your experience with the collar retention? So do you have issues with maybe collars falling off, or also technical issues if the collars break, etc.?
Yep. So our collars last year to this year have changed hardware wise. The connection mechanism last year wasn't quite as good as we wanted it to be. So we switched to high grade hiking locking carabiners, and our retention has been as good as we've seen. There are breakaway points on the collars. So yes, some collars do come off, but as far as retention on just your normal everyday animal, we did not have any issues with retention.
The Nofence collars, retention isn't really an issue. If a collar does fall off, it's probably due to improper collar fit. I will say that many of our customers are using this to graze woodlands, practice agroforestry, silvopasture, and so collars can, there's the potential to get hung up in brushy areas. In that case, it is a breakaway neck strap. It will break under pressure, and you receive a notification when a collar has detected no movement for 4 hours. So there's some built-in safety features, and then each collar is GPSed, and so you can go directly to it.
Yep, in the Halter system, as I think the biggest potential issue out there is just going to be that collar application, making sure the collars are put on well, which it's difficult, right? We're putting cows to shoot, making sure that they're not leaning too far forward, too far back. It's just one of those things that we've really worked through, I think, during that application process. And of course, we do have that breakaway system on the collar. So if they do get hung up, they will break away, fall off, and you'll be able to use GPS to go find that collar. So collars, should break. If a cow gets hung up, they should break away. And that's one of the things that, our system can do out there in the pasture. But as long as, those collars are put on well that first time, ideally, there's no loss out there in the field.
And with eShepherd, eShepherd is a self-install system. So we make recommendations about fitment, and that generally goes pretty well. We ask ranchers and farmers to send us photos as they're progressing things, and generally speaking, collars stay on so that they don't fall off. If a neckband was to get caught in a tree and the top strap was to break, generally speaking, the neckband falls on its side, and therefore a panel is still pointing to the sun. It's continuing to get charged, and it just sits on the ground saying, "Here I am, come and get me." And it'll just keep on doing that as long as the sun shines.
You guys have any other questions, participants? Q&A feature, we can see those. I have a question. All of these companies talked about the cost in terms of dollars and cents, but maybe some of the producers could speak to what's the added value, right? Where do you really get the value from implementing or using a virtual fence system?
So I could kick us off with that. The value that we've been able to gain, some of the other producers have highlighted different parts that, to be honest, I think we all kind of would agree on. A big part is the animal health. I think it was Nofence that mentioned if their neckband falls off, they get the alert after 4 hours. It's the same way for eShepherd. In fact, I was in Arkansas for military training, and I happened to get an alert saying a neckband had either fallen off the animal or stopped moving. I called up the rest of my team up in Montana, said, "Hey, there might be something going on. Maybe you just fell in the bottom of the creek," because that's where it was showing. Turns out we had 5 critters all bogged down in the creek in mud, and in like a set stocking system where we check on them, maybe once or twice, like every other week, those animals would have died. When we were doing polyfence, moving them every 3 days, maybe we would have caught them, maybe we wouldn't. With this, it was instant. It was, in terms of ranching anyway, it was like near instant. 4 hours, and it's telling me, "Hey, I have a problem," and they're able to get that out there, take a tractor, take chains, get them out of the creek. That's when critters are going, your bred critters are going for over $2,000. That we just paid for a quarter of the system right there. So in terms of just the dollars and cents, in terms of all the things that ranchers don't like to measure, we never put a worth on our time. That's huge. When we were doing polyfencing, we were spending about a day a week moving polyfence. I now take 20 minutes at the beginning of a week, maybe, or every other week, and they're set up for days and days. On top of that, we can actually have side jobs. I've been able to keep my side job in the military, like full-time rancher, side job with the military. Wife does massage therapy, and our other business partner, he works as a mechanic up in North Dakota. Without virtual fencing, we wouldn't have been able to do those things because we're trying to aggressively grow our operation into the fullness of like all my family's place, which is $38,000 or 38,000 acres, half of which is BLM, half of which is deeded. we wouldn't be able to do that without virtual fencing. So there's so many aspects of value, and I think all of us producers would agree with that, regardless of the system that we're using.
Yeah, I definitely agree as well. Like you were saying, being down in Florida, I myself on my farm went down to southern Utah to do a virtual fencing presentation from 9 hours away from my ranch, where I had laid out my hay to feed the wheat. All I had to do was pass hay that they were fed 30 minutes. And so the home life now really helped things out a little bit on my end. I'm able to spend time with my young kids and do more things with them rather than go check on cows and move cows like do it with my phone. But yeah, huge amount. So.
Yeah, as far as Vence, I would have to build off those points too. And like I said earlier, we're 3 hours away from all summer. We don't have houses over there. We have a little cow camp that, if you have to stay the night, you stay there. But we're monitoring 350 cows from 3 hours away. And back to the no movement, Vence has the same thing. As long as everything's in movement and everything's in and well, we're doing more with the same amount or less people. Whether we're here or we're in Idaho, when those our employees don't have to go that extra distance to go check on cows, and we can use them here at our main place. We have a feedlot, we got cows, and we have sheep. I mean, we're so diverse that when we can use those guys in many different ways, other than having them do one single job all the time, that's huge for us in our business.
So I think another question is in terms of the virtual fencing, have you, and I think some of you alluded to it, but have you changed your grazing patterns? And obviously some of you mentioned pasture utilization, but maybe just speak to how your grazing management has changed since implementing a virtual fence system.
I can kick us off again with that one. We've really been able to take a lot of things almost for granted now in the past few months. We used to use horses a lot. We love our horses, but honestly, virtual fencing has almost eliminated the need for them because I don't gather anymore. I just manage my grazing patterns so that when I need them near the corral during branding time, I show up about 10, 15 minutes before I want to start branding, gather them up into the corral, and I'm done. Like that's the gather. I don't have to worry about when we get done branding. I just turn them out into a virtual paddock, and then I manage the grazing back to where I want them to go. If I'm wanting them to trail from one side of the pasture to the other, I can do that with virtual fencing and manage their grazing to be able to do that around wildlife patterns, around like be able to graze around our water source availability and use our water sources in these drought years that are causing our reservoirs to go dry so darn early. I can now make them, concentrate on a single reservoir, keeping the others deeper and colder so they don't have as much or evaporation anymore. So it's really just limited to your own creativity of what you can do with the grazing management of, how tight you can make like these virtual paddocks and how small you want to be able to make them. It's quite astonishing what we get to do now that we would have never been able to do even with poly fencing. We wouldn't have been able to do it.
I'll admit Brandon's, he's right. You're limited on creativity, and if you're me, you're also limited on water access. I've learned that our number one issue that limits our creativity on what we can do is water points, and it's not even close. In a lot of ways, we're doing a lot better job grazing, but it also makes grazing a little more complicated. And that, like in a native pasture setting, for us, for example, we might have 20 soil types, a couple different elevation changes, places that might make 1,300 pounds of forage per acre, and another part of the pasture that makes 5,500 pounds, and maybe in the bottom next to a creek. And so those variabilities almost become, I'd say, acre by acre management, but it's actually probably more precise than that. It's going to take a lot of learning, I think, to actually get our ranch to the full potential. Because when you're, instead of looking at 30 pastures, you're looking at 20,000 acres as individual grazing units. It's a lot. But water, I mean, I can't stress that, how limiting that is. It's terrible.
I think for RDO running on a little bit, wider open country, what we graze, but what we should not and don't graze is maybe just as important. We got, like I said before, we got these small trees that the Potlatch Forest Service has put in, right? And you don't want to disturb them with the cattle and stuff like that. So you can lightly graze around those or not graze at them all. Creeks where they have these fish habitats, we're keeping them off of there. And Vence Steel's safe around water, I'm sure, as the others are too. So we don't worry about that. You can force them to drink in other springs, or stay away from the creeks where some of these people don't want. And also in an open range community, there's people that don't keep up with their fence, but they feel free to call you all the time and tell you how your cows are in there and whatnot, right? That's just part of the nature, and I don't think that's going to get any better as the future goes on, sadly enough. But to be able to put events around their house and they don't know, right? Or they do know, but they don't have to maintain their fence as much, and you don't have to sit there worrying at night about our cattle in their yards, right? They wake up to them the next morning and they're in there grazing. We've eliminated that problem. We've eliminated the phone calls. We've eliminated the controversy between neighbors, newcomers. I think it's just for the whole area, it's benefited not only us, but the people that own the land and the people that own the land around you.
I think you bring up a really good point, Caleb. I don't know that anybody specifically mentioned it, but I think all of these products actually it's a two-way deal, right? You can use virtual fence to keep cattle in, but you can also use virtual fence just as effectively to keep cattle out of an area, which is a huge benefit.
Correct. And we have a big perimeter, Vence set. But I have a more intense one set within the permit that are around these people that don't keep up with their fences. They're around these waterways. They're some of the busier roads. It's still open range on the road, but if you can help keep them off of the road, right? Not only are you saving the safety of the cattle, but you're for the safety of the people and the log trucks that are going by in the middle of the night. And you're not just helping yourselves. I guess I feel like you're helping the community and those who are around you and neighbor you.
And I've
With
got one.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
was just going to add that with like East Shepherd, you can do like small little exclusion zones that can get super tiny. I have a piece of like old farm equipment that's just sitting out in the pasture that's been there for almost 100 years, and they used to always rub it on it. I just excluded that so they couldn't go rub on it and wouldn't be getting these neckbands off.
Yeah, the Nofence system's got the same thing with the exclusion zones. I've been able to create an exclusion zone around some big gun sprinklers and keep the cows away from rubbing on the sprinklers and not breaking the sprinkler heads off and everything too. So that's been a definite benefit.
We've got one more question from a participant. What about processing collared cattle? So are you able to run those cattle through the chute, work them with the collars on?
Can you say your question again?
Yeah, in terms of processing cattle, running them through the chute with the collars on, is that feasible?
I mean, for East Shepherd, which is actually kind of the biggest of all of them, I've had absolutely no issues at all. Like the biggest biggest consideration is actually just, and it's only when you're putting it on. It's not when you're going to take it off or even mess with it. Is when you go to put it on, you want the animal like all the way forward. So, either a backup bar or throwing a pipe in there so they can't back up. So you have full exposure to that neck. It just makes your job a whole lot easier. But I mean, as for then running them through the corrals, running them like through everything else, even with them swinging around and like joshing each other, no issues at all.
I know with the halter system, I started with, I guess, the dairy industry, getting into a lot of different metal pieces and chutes, but there aren't any issues with working those cows, putting them through hydraulic chute, manual, whatever you need to. No issues with it getting caught up or anything like that.
Yeah, to touch on Jags is, from academia where you're on cows, they shoots every week. And we've had no issues with halters running multiple times per week through shoot and no damage, no problems.
Same thing with Vence. We don't have any issues on our end as well.
I'll also kind of piggyback on what Travis said from a research perspective. We've put cattle on a trailer with these collars on and haven't really had a problem with anything getting hung up. So
Thomas, I've got something to add if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
So one thing that I like to highlight, and this is again, this I feel like transcends the company. It goes for all of them. Is for all of us, all of us producers, we had the goals, the things that we thought we were going to accomplish, and for the most part, I would say every single one of us is accomplishing those things. But what's actually almost just as valuable are the things that you didn't know these systems were capable of, and you get to discover as you start using it. Like East Shepherd has a feature called return to paddock. So if one critter happens to get out, it'll actually bring her back. And I've watched this happen, and it brings her back. And sure enough, she even hit a barrier in a creek where she couldn't cross. The system basically said, "Hey, I can't get you. I'll leave you alone." And after a little bit of leaving her alone, she found a spot to cross, and it kept trying. Or we don't have a lot of predators in our area, but we kind of have a predator event. And East Shepherd has a thing where if an animal is running, it basically says there's a good reason why you're running. Going after a calf, a predator doesn't matter. I'm going to let you run through that virtual boundary. And once you calm down, once you slow down, I'll bring you back. Well, I happened to notice every single animal of mine was out one day. And using the tracks feature, I was able to look at all the individual tracks and see that at 6:08 a.m., they all broke out at the same exact time in a very fast, very straight line. Why would they do that? It's basically only a predator went through. But they all recaught themselves into their own virtual pasture because of where the water was, and they were fine. We went out there, looked at them, completely fine. No one was hurt, nothing else like that. So couldn't have been probably a big predator. But the fact that they were also such a tight bunch, if it was something like a mountain lion or bear, they probably just looked at that dense herd and goes, "Nope, that's too much work. I'm moving on." So
I have one other question to answer on Jonathan's question here on the price of the halter system, and the pricing overall. So with our system, we have the towers and the collars. That tower is going to be an upfront price. That's about $4,500 per tower. And then on the collar side, ranges from about $60 to $80 per collar per year, kind of depending on what you want to do with the system. And that includes, so cell service as many people as you want in the app. And then along with that, the lifetime warranty, as long as you're paying it and anything goes wrong, we replace it. And there's no issues with that, as long as you're not purposefully breaking the collars themselves.
One thing on what Brandon was talking about, Halter has a very similar process, and this is going back to the positive cues, I think, that they were talking about, is the ability to use vibrations. And so we've had Halter since, I guess, it was May. And so do it's really tight rotations of less than an acre, moving cows multiple times per day. And the collars actually, through the cues, actually move. And we were moving cows within a couple minutes per day of the collar actually telling that cow to move to the next location. And that's through those vibrations that Jack was talking about, directional vibrations and moving them that way. And so that's part of the added benefit of the cost structure, right? Is I can really decrease my labor because I have the ability to move those cows multiple times per day and actually do directional moves with it's an act of moving those cows. And so that's a little bit of that positive reinforcement that goes through that training process.
Looks like we've got maybe one more question and then we'll kind of wrap up. This is in terms of like grazing situations. The example that they provided is trying to graze cows in a dry pasture next to maybe a lush irrigated hay meadow. You know, is that an area where you see breakouts or cattle pulled over the virtual boundary due to that high quality forage, that lush pasture?
We saw that on our creeks, where they just stay, greener longer. And we have a whole chunk of our pasture that through set stock grazing only ever saw about 10% coverage from cows. Well, with these shepherds, we were getting between 60 and 80%. And even though it was this old, oxidized, heavy oxidized part of the pasture, they were having to walk by a green, or at least slightly still green anyway, chunk of the creek, and they would walk by it every day without any issue. Never once did they try and get out to go to it. So I was able to keep them in just fine.
Yeah, with the Nofence system, I've had them in many different locations, many different scenarios. Lush pasture versus older pasture, and never had a problem with them trying to break out of that virtual perimeter going into any different part. If they did, maybe one, but they didn't last 10 minutes and they were back with the herd just because the herd mentality took over and they were wanting to be back where everybody else was. So it's done a really good job on containment. And I'm sure all the companies do the exact same thing.
I think
Great.
I think Daniel's picture kind of showed it the best. And so that's a pretty impressive photo of the ability of a virtual fence, especially in a small area, to control animals in. And I know in our instances, we've had cows pissed off at us because their calves are out grazing in front of them, and the cows are sitting there on some old woofy forage, and they're mad because their calves or their calves are grazing in front of them, and they're sitting at that line waiting for us to move.
Travis, you just beat it. I was trying to pull up my phone and talk about that exact same. One of the things I'm so happy with is the creep ahead grazing that it allows. But like you said, the calves are very rarely actually in those super, super tight holding areas where those holding paddocks. They're out almost like a creep ahead creep feeder. And then I don't have time to upload. I don't know if anybody can see that. But I have 100 pairs right now on a sliver. And it's stockpiled fescue alfalfa on the other side of that line. And quite frankly, I don't know why they don't just walk through it and go eat. It seems to work. It keeps them in.
Okay, I know we're sorry. Last comment. Was that Brandon?
It was. I was just gonna add that not only did we also see the creeping effect, it actually had we believe a pretty measurable effect when it came to weaning the calves, because we're dealing with such huge open ranges, like in the physical pastures. Like we would watch these calves get a drink of milk in the morning, go out like half a mile or more from their mothers during the day, go get all the best feed, and then come back at night, get another drink of milk, and stay with mom. We never expected to see something like that.
Excellent discussion. We heard a lot of information about virtual fencing. I hope that this has been a really informative event for our attendees and also like the company representatives and then the producer speakers as well. I learned a lot. With time limit, I'm going to transition to closing our webinar today. The recording of today will be posted to our UNL Beef Watch YouTube channel, and I will send a notification to all the attendees and registrants. If you have any question about any products, if you have a problem identifying the contact information, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to connect you with the correct company representatives. With that, thank you so much, and I'm going to close our event. Thank you all, sponsors and producers, speakers, for hosting such a great show. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.